He went on. I shall issue orders for your recall as soon as there is the slightest change in the situation. But I must tell you that the hopes of any such change are slim. I can't predict how events will develop, but I think the best that the colonel suddenly yelled the next word, loyal man among you can hope for is to be sent to join General Denikin's forces on the Don. So my orders to the whole regiment, with the exception of the officers and those who were on sentry duty last night, are to dismiss and return immediately to your homes. What? What? The incredulous murmur ran down the ranks and the bayonets dipped and swayed. Bewildered faces gazed around them, some were plainly relieved, some even delighted. Staff Captain Studzinski stepped forward from the group of officers. Bluish-white in the face, squinting, he took a few paces towards Colonel Malyshev, then glanced round at the officers. Myshlavsky was not looking at Studzinski but was still staring at Colonel Malyshev's mustache. From his expression he looked exactly as if he was about to indulge in his usual habit of breaking out in obscene abuse. Karas stupidly put his arms akimbo and blinked. In the separate group of young ensigns there suddenly came the rustling sound of the rash, dangerous word arrest. What was that? Muttered a deep voice from the ranks of the cadets. Arrest. Treachery. Studzinski suddenly gave an inspired look upward at the electric light globe above his head, then glanced down at the butt of his holster and barked. Number 1 Troop. The first rank broke up, several gray figures stepped forward. A strangely confused scene ensued. Colonel, said Studzinski in a thin, hoarse voice, you are under arrest. Arrest him? One of the ensigns suddenly shrieked hysterically and moved toward the colonel. Stop, gentlemen! Shouted Karas, who although his mind did not work fast had firmly grasped the import of the situation. Myshlavsky leapt swiftly forward, grabbed the impetuous ensign by the sleeve of his greatcoat and pulled him back. Let me go, Lieutenant! Shouted the ensign, grimacing with fury. Quiet! The colonel's voice rang out with complete self-assurance. Although his mouth was twitching as much as the ensign's and his face was mottled with red, there was more calm and confidence in his expression than any of the other officers could muster at that moment. All stood still. Quiet, repeated the colonel. I order you all to stay where you are and listen to me. Silence reigned, and Myslyaevsky became sharply attentive. It was as if a sudden thought had occurred to him and he was now expecting some news from the colonel that was considerably more important than that which he just announced. I see, said the colonel, his cheek twitching, that I would have made a fine fool of myself if I had tried going into battle with the motley crew which the good Lord saw fit to provide me with. Obviously it was just as well that I didn't. But what is excusable in a student volunteer or a young cadet, and possibly just excusable in an ensign is utterly inexcusable in you, Staff Captain Studzinski. With this the colonel withered Studzinski with a look of quite exceptional virulence, his eyes flashing with sparks of genuine exasperation. Again there was silence. Well, now, went on the colonel, I have never attended a meeting in my life, but it seems that I shall have to start now. Very well, let's hold a meeting. Now I agree that your attempt to arrest your commanding officer does credit to your patriotism, but it also shows that you are, how shall I put it, gentlemen? Inexperienced. Briefly, I have no time left and nor, I assure you, the colonel said with baleful emphasis, have you. Let me ask you a question, whom are you proposing to defend? Silence. I'm asking you, whom do you mean to defend? The colonel repeated threateningly. His eyes burning with interest, Myslyaevsky stepped forward, saluted and said, We are in duty bound to defend the Hermann, sir. The hetman? The colonel questioned in return. Good. Regiment, attention. He suddenly roared in a voice that made the entire regiment jump to attention. Listen to me. This morning at approximately 4 a.m. the hetman shamefully abandoned us all to our fate and ran away. Yes, he ran away, like the most miserable scoundrel and coward. This morning too, an hour after the hetman, our commanding general, General Bulgakov, ran away in the same way as the hetman, in a German train. In no more than a few hours from now we shall be witnesses of a catastrophe in which the wretched people like yourselves who were tricked and involved into this absurd escapade will be slaughtered like dogs. Listen, on the outskirts of this city Petliura has an army over 100,000 strong, and tomorrow, what am I saying, tomorrow, today? And the colonel pointed out of the window to where the sky was beginning to pale over the city, the isolated, disorganized units formed from officers and cadets, abandoned by those swine at headquarters and by those two unspeakable rogues Skoropadsky and Belarukov, who should both be hung, will be faced by Petliura's troops who are well armed and who outnumber them by 20 to 1. Listen, boys. Colonel Malyshev suddenly exclaimed in a breaking voice, although his age made him more of an elder brother than a father to the rows of bayonet-toting youths in front of Herne, listen. I am a regular officer. I went through the German war, as Staff Captain Studzinski here will witness, and I know what I'm talking about. I assume full and absolute responsibility for what I'm doing. Understand? I'm warning you. And I'm sending you home. Do you understand why? He shouted. Yes, yes, answered the crowd, bayonets swaying. Then loudly and convulsively a cadet in the second rank burst into tears. To the utter surprise of the regiment and probably of himself, Staff Captain Studzinski crammed his gloved fist into his eyes with a strange and most unofficer-like gesture, at which the regiment's nominal roll fell to the floor, and burst into tears. Infected by him, several more cadets began weeping, the ranks disintegrated, and the disorderly uproar was only stopped when Myshlavsky, in his Radamez voice, roared an order to the bugler. Cadet Pavlovsky,